Veteran on the Move, episode number 7. Welcome to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you're a transitioning veteran, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone who's still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. So welcome aboard, sit back, and enjoy the ride. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Richard Rierson. He is a husband, father of 4 daughters, former Marine Corps officer, leadership coach, trainer, speaker, entrepreneur, and podcast host. You can find him at doseofleadership.com. Hey, Richard, it's great to have you on the show today. I'd like to start with give us a quick summary about what you did in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, sure. I was primarily a pilot. I got commissioned in December of 91 and went on active duty in early 92 and went through the basic course, what all Marine Corps officers have to do, 6-month infantry course, and then pretty much went to flight school from late 92 until late 94, and then entered the fleet in 95, where I started flying KC-130s for the Marine Corps and did that all the way up until 2001 when I finally got out. So that was the gist of my what I did in the Marine Corps.
And you had a similar transition that I had over to the airlines, but a quick ending also.
Yeah, for sure. We were talking in the pre-interview that, my last tour with the Marine Corps was actually with a joint tour with the Air Force, flying as an instructor in T-37. And everybody at that time was getting out of the military because the airlines were hiring like crazy. This was pre-9/11, right? And I don't remember if you remember the kind of the word on the street was all the airlines says there's not enough pilots in the pipeline to fill our demand. The demand for airline pilots was going to exponentially grow. Do you remember that? Do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. And ironically enough, they're saying the same thing today.
Yeah, right. It's like deja vu all over again. And so I jumped on that bandwagon because I think, all of us, I saw kind of this shining pot of gold on the hill where, you heard all these great stories where guys are working 12 days a month. They're doing what they love. You're flying. Of course, I loved flying. I still do. And it just was so attractive. And so I made the leap. And I finished my training on September 8th, 2001. And I had 3 days off. And I was sitting reserve in Dallas. I was living in Wichita, Kansas. And I commuted from Wichita to Dallas on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And when I landed in Dallas, they closed the airspace down, and that's walked up into the ops center, and that's when the second plane hit the towers. And I flew 6 times after that in September and was furloughed October 1st. And so that was my short stint as an airline pilot, 1 month worth of active flying, 6 flights.
Wow. And so at that point, you were out on the street, well detached from the Marine Corps, and had to go through another transition into the civilian world during pretty tough economic times.
Yeah, very scary. And I remember I remember a very panicky feeling. I mean, the fortunate thing was I was living, my dad, because airline pay was so horribly bad the first year on probation pay. I think at American it was, I don't know what is Delta, but it was $23,000. I think it came out to that first year at American, barely even survive, you know? So my dad actually said, hey, why don't you move in with me here in Wichita? And we did, thank goodness. And so I didn't have any rent. The only bill I had was a car payment. That was the only bill that I had, thank God. But I was scared. I was thinking, man, what am I going to do? Because all I know how to do is fly airplanes. I remember saying that to myself. And of course, nobody was going to be hiring any pilots. There was going to be no flying jobs that paid anything to be had. And so I was kind of thrust in the corporate arena. And so I got a job as a shipping supervisor, paying $17 an hour. And it was very eye-opening because, there's people that have getting paid that all the time. I don't know how they do it. I honestly do not know how people do it on $17 an hour. And I'm living with my dad with no other bills except the car payment. And we were scraping by. I don't know how people do it, but it was very educational for sure. And that's when it hit me. And we were talking too, that how much the Marine Corps and the military in general taught me about leadership. Those skills didn't really become apparent to me until that moment. It really didn't, because I just kind of saw myself as a guy that knew how to fly airplanes. But the Marine Corps really did teach me how to be a decision maker and leadership, and all that stuff really slapped me in the face once I got thrust in that corporate environment.
Yeah, I think sometimes all veterans experience that high op tempo and intensive training and all the different schools you go through and all the massive amount of experience you have, and even a short 4-year enlistment. And you get out in the civilian world, and you realize, wow, I've done a lot, and
Yeah.
I've really grown and matured a lot compared to my buddies that are still back on the block, or compared to my civilian counterparts as I go into the workforce. So,
Absolutely.
so talk about how the Marine Corps prepared you leadership wise, but yet no one was really offering to hire you as the CEO of the company, were they?
No, not at all. In fact, like I said, I mean, it just kind of happened. I came across this job, through referrals and through family members that I knew, and they were looking for somebody to run the shipping department. And again, I had no shipping and receiving experience, but I could figure it out. It made kind of sense. Yeah, you get an order, you fill it, you get it ready for the truck driver. The truck driver comes at an allotted time, and you load up his truck, and away you go, and you do it over and over again. And I'll never forget when, of course, you can imagine how everybody was looking at me as I come in, this fresh, still having the Marine Corps haircut, kind of look about myself in my younger 30s. And here's all these veteran shipping and receiving guys. Some of them literally look like the Sons of Anarchy. I'm not kidding you, with the teardrop tattoos coming by their eye and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, And they're all looking at me with, you can imagine the skepticism, like, what is this chump going to tell us about shipping and receiving? And I approached it just like I did as a brand new officer in the Marine Corps. Woe is the young officer that comes in and tries to throw his, rank around, even though on paper you are accountable for that entire group. You can't throw your position or your title. You're the most inexperienced guy in the bunch, right? And so that was a big lesson the Marine Corps taught me. He's like, how do you get into that situation and earn the trust and the respect of that group? And you do that by taking care of them and not trying to pretend that you have all the answers, because you don't. And your job is to take care of them and to remove obstacles so they can become the best shipping and receiving department possible. And that's the attitude I went to it at. And that's what the Marine Corps taught me directly. And, and shortly when I had my first meeting with those guys, I said, they were looking at me and I said, okay, guys, so, this is who I am. I'm Richard Rierson. Gave a little bit about my story. And I said, I'm here to help you. Tell me what you need. And they sat there kind of stupefied. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, look, guys, you guys are the expert. I'm not. I'm just here to remove, the big obstacles for you. And eventually I started warming up, and they said, hey, we'd like a magnet board, a dry erase board. We want this, we want that. And afterwards, this guy with the teardrop tattoos came up to me and said, in all that time, no one's ever asked us that before. And that floored me, absolutely floored me. That, it just showed you kind of the deficit that exists, I think, in the real kind of corporate civilian world, as opposed to the military, and particularly the Marine Corps, where it's just such a way of life that's just ingrained in you from day one. And that's when it really hit me how much the Marine Corps and the military teaches you about common sense leadership.
Yeah, that's incredible. Sometimes, like you learned in the Marine Corps, leadership is very, very basic, and it's just all the things you just said. But yet we try to complicate it. We get overrun with detail and busy schedules and everything, and we forget sometimes. The best of us can forget what true leadership is all about. And it's just about take care of the folks that work for you, and that had to make you feel pretty good when Sons of Anarchy came up to you and told you that, because he probably hasn't said a whole lot of nice things about previous bosses, if that's the case.
And and they did, and again, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer either, but I mean, I think that just having empathy and caring about them, and again, the Marine Corps, I can't tell you how many, because you saw bad examples in the Marine Corps. We all did. We saw bad examples of leadership, and they really stick out. That's the thing that I really want to emphasize with that. Even though you saw bad examples, they didn't get very far, and you got called on the carpet for being kind of that, hey, I'm a major, you better listen to what I say, and you do get a certain deference of respect even when you walk in a room, because of the rank and because of the culture and the tradition. And that's great. And something that, the civilian sector, you really don't have, and you really, you're never really going to see to that extent. But at the same time, you can see, how do I even say this? The imminence of, or the capacity of love, if I can even say that, is so prevalent in the Marine Corps. I don't, and I don't say that, that it's touchy feely, but if your heart is in the right place and you lead from a place of authenticity, and man, those people will do anything for you, anything. And there's so much power in that. And that's a great lesson I've learned too.
And it's so true. And of course, that philosophy works no matter where you are, whether you're
Absolutely.
in the Marine Corps or any other service or out in the civilian sector. Leadership is leadership, and it's immediately recognized, and it's appreciated and rewarded.
Yeah. And I think there's a big misconception. I know people from on the civilian side, and it was a big struggle in my transition of kind of going from, hey, I was doing a lot of real world kick-ass things, if I can say that word on your podcast. But I mean, I think, there was this feeling of, and now here I am, I'm trying to, we're stressing about plastic bird feeders from China, really? And wind chimes? What? Really? And it took me a while to get over that kind of, and put it in the proper perspective. Yeah, it is wind chimes. Yeah, it isn't necessarily, dropping bombs on target or getting critical supplies to the trigger pullers on front. Okay, but these are people's lives that we're dealing with here. And yeah, it is plastic bird feeders and wind chimes, but this is the livelihood of 400 people that are dependent upon all this being the best wind chimes and the best bird feeders that there are out there. You know what I mean? And when you look at perspective, I think that was probably my biggest transition hurdle that I had to get over coming from the military.
Now, obviously, you probably didn't stay as the shipping manager for very long. Are there any other civilian jobs that you progressed through or came across that hold significance with you at this point?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and I think I was talking to you. If you look at my resume, if I put it in front of you, it's a potpourri of like where is the connection? You would probably ask, what are you going to be when you grow up? Have you figured out what you're going to do? Because it went from a shipping supervisor to a director of international operations to the director of new product development, then to a hotel company where I did land entitlement. And then I became a communications guy. Then I became the operations guy. Then I moved to a aircraft company where I did program management, and then I managed the program managers, and now I'm flying again. And so it's like all over the board, but the common thread and what's important, the reason why I say that is, again, is like, oh, look how great I am. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the skills, all of that, any modicum of success, I can directly attribute to the skills and the mindset and the philosophy that the Marine Corps taught me. 100%, no doubt about it.
And I think this is one of the things that I try to emphasize to veterans themselves is a lot of times they sell themselves short. They really don't know the value of experience and leadership capabilities that they possess. Yeah, they might have to take the lower level job right out of the chute and then work their way up from there. But their skills and leadership experience will immediately be recognized and rewarded. And even if you don't move up in the first place you land, you will be able to start doing some lateral moves and going up the ladder, going left and right if you have to.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. And I think that, and again, kind of getting over the fact of, yeah, you did all the cool stuff that you did do, and you were responsible for a lot of stuff. I get it. No one cares about it. They do a little bit, but they really don't. You know what I mean? So I would caution anybody not to, nobody hates more than anything else. Like, well, this is how we did it in the Marine Corps, well, I don't care, and so just kind of keep quiet and get yourself and look for those opportunities. And there are plenty. There are a plethora of opportunities where you can lead, and you don't need the position, you don't need the title, because you had to lead regardless of what your rank was in the military. In every aspect of the military, you had to lead. And man, there is a huge vacuum, because I think in the civilian sector, people think they're expecting the leadership to come from one place. And in the military, we may think that's the way it is, but it really isn't. Everybody's kind of demanded or obligated to lead regardless of what rank they're in, right?
Absolutely. And the current conflicts that we're in right now, show that better than ever. That
Oh yeah.
Distributed warfare. You have small teams all over the country of Afghanistan, and we just like we had them in Iraq. That seems to be heating up again. But distributed warfare with small teams. You have small team leaders, and the term the strategic corporal, because when that corporal, who's a team leader, when he busts that door down, and they go into that room, the decisions he makes with his team can have strategic implications.
Global and national policy decisions can be made because of that 20-year-old corporal that made a decision, that was a life or death decision that he's not afforded, and you hit it right in the head. You're not afforded the opportunity to run that decision up a hierarchical chain. And I think if that mindset right there of having the ability and the courage to make a decision, ask for forgiveness and not permission, that alone will allow you to be so much more successful than you can even imagine. Just having that decision-making ability is so huge and so powerful. And it's probably, I would think, one of the biggest pitfalls and weaknesses in the civilian sector, this lack of ability of people wanting to make decisions and to hold themselves accountable to those decisions.
And there are some phenomenal civilian leaders out there, and it's always recognized, and those guys always go far. And my personal opinion, and that's all it is sometimes it's lacking in the civilian sector only because they don't spend the time and the money to train their people for that. They just get to work and start making things happen, and we'll figure out who the leaders are as we go along. But in the military, we spend so much time in schools and training and philosophically and professional military education and everything because we understand we have the institution available to pull that off and do that. And we understand the true value of leadership. And we understand that in military operations, you're going to be in austere conditions and such tough scenarios that only leadership will get you through.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so emphasized within the military. And but there's definitely some great leadership and competence in the civilian world.
Oh yeah,
most of those guys have risen to the top on their own. They haven't been well educated or groomed by the specific company, because a lot of your small companies they don't have the budget to do those kinds of things. So they look for leaders and they grab them and try to hold on to them and reward them. But sometimes that's why they like having a guy come out of the military, a veteran, who has that experience and has that leadership training and skills, and they can implement those capabilities into their own company. Yeah. Now, you bounced from several jobs and moved your way around through the civilian sector for quite a while there. And one of the themes that you're talking about is leadership and your skills and abilities as a leader, which you credit to which the Marine Corps taught you to do. This over time, what started to happen in your own career or in your side business, your entrepreneurial pursuits, is you started an organization and started writing some books, and now you even have a podcast that focuses on leadership, essentially. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the entrepreneurial journey is relatively new for me. I think I've always been passionate. I know I've always been passionate about leadership since high school, and I actually was in a competition. Oh, I don't know if have you ever heard of DECA, Distributed Education Clubs of America? DECA, it's an organization in high schools. Yes, yeah, I heard. Of course, I spent enough times in the Marine Corps that DECA means the commissary at this point. But yeah, I think right. I do remember that from high school. Yeah, it's a marketing and business club for simplistic purposes. But one of the areas where you could compete in was entrepreneurship, and basically what you did is you came up with a business idea and you wrote out a business plan, and then the competition or the judges were people who were people that you were trying to acquire capital from. And so that's when I really started getting passionate about that. And I competed and went to nationals and always thought I was going to run my own business. And when I got into college and I found the opportunity to, fly and join the Marine Corps, I did that, and I did it full bore. And I kind of just always kind of thought, man, it'd be great to have my own business. But as I looked back and I replayed it, there was always something that prevented me. There's always something, I'm not
smart enough. I don't know. It's going to be a big failure. There was always this overriding fear preventing me from taking the steps, even regardless of all the training and everything, decision making, all the stuff that I've talked about and taught in the Marine Corps. There was still this side of me that figured I had to have the perfect product, the perfect business plan, everything had to be lined up in a row before I made the trigger to do something on my own or create something on my own.
And I think what you're talking about, what you've experienced is what every entrepreneur goes through.
Yeah. And I think that was, and so the podcast really was a genesis. So I started speaking, just through a natural progression of kind of coming up with material. And when I was in the hotel industry, came up with started teaching my property managers before they hit the field. At the end of the class, I started teaching them about common sense leadership and sharing them with my stories from the Marine Corps and flying. And it resonated, and that eventually led to a paid gig and speaking gigs. And I thought, man, this will be good. I can do this. Well, as we all know, you can't think when you build a blog or a website or a podcast, you think, you build it and they will come and they will listen, kind of like a Field of Dreams thing. And it's really not the case. You still got to hustle and find an audience, and all that stuff still is relevant. But I was sitting there after I'd created a blog for about a year, not really getting the traffic that I was in. And the whole intention behind the blog was like, I'm going to get more speaking gigs, get more noticed. And it just really wasn't happening. And so I was looking at the edge of my one morning, just thinking, how can I get more noticed? And I was looking at my bookshelf, and that's when I said, what if I just interviewed everybody that's on my bookshelf right here? And I thought that would be kind of cool. I mean, we would just have a conversation about leadership. I'm passionate about it. I love talking about it. It'd be good for them. It would promote them, make them, highlight their work and celebrate their work. And so I literally that afternoon or that late morning, I emailed everybody on that bookshelf just saying, hey, I'm starting a podcast. I'm starting it in late January. I had nothing. I had no plans, nothing. I just kind of just said that I don't know what prompted me that day to just say that. And I'm glad I did that because it gave me that kind of date out there that I'm going to launch this in late January. And well, that evening, I got 2 responses out of the 50 some emails that I sent out. One was from Jim Kuzes, who's written a bunch of leadership books with Barry Posner. And then David Allen, who's really big on this guy called a book called Getting Things Done. And those were 2 heavy hitters in that kind of space. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they said they'd love to be a part of it. Now, these are guys of books that I've read, and I just had no idea that would have wanted to talk to me about it, but they agreed. And then I also, that evening, I just called on the phone Gene Kranz, who was the flight director of NASA during the heyday, during the Apollo 11. He was the guy that was, Ed Harris portrayed him in Apollo 13 wearing the white vest and the crew cut flat top,
Yeah, definitely.
Failure's not an option type. It was him. And I've always been a fan of him, fan of NASA and all that. And I called him at his house just kind of on a whim. And I said, hey, I'm a former Marine Corps pilot. I love talking about leadership. I'm starting a podcast. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So that evening I had 3 kind of committals, and that really was the genesis of me going forward. I didn't know how I was going to get it done. I just knew I was going to get it done. And 5 weeks later, I launched the podcast with 6 interviews under my belt, and I've been going ever since. And that really kind of was, I would say, the birth of the real entrepreneurial journey, where I really got committed to taking risks and doing things, suspending the belief in how it's going to get done. I just knew it was going to get done. So that's how it started.
I was going to ask you specifically about how you got some of the big hitters that are on your podcast, how you got them to interview. And of course, I should have known the answer was, well, I just asked them.
That's right. And that was probably one of the most asked questions I get, because, I can't believe it. And Steve Forbes was probably my first real big kind of well-known heavy hitter interview. Uh-huh. And everybody says, well, how did you finally get him? And honestly, he was one of the easiest. That was literally, I just asked, and he said, yep, let's do it. And he forwarded me to and he responded himself, said, yeah, let's do it. And it just shows you how, we waste so much time worrying about, these people or whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be an interview with somebody. It could be a major decision of, I'd like to learn something from this person. I'd like them to be a mentor of mine, whatever it is. You just ask. You never know what's going to happen. Now, coupled with that, there was a lot of no's and a lot of no responses. I don't want to kid you. I just didn't send out 5 emails and Steve Forbes said yes. There's a lot of numbers to that to try to get some of those guests. But at the root of it is I just asked, and I was authentic. I didn't have no pitchy pitch sell, no selly sell, no, hey, look at me. It was simple and direct. I want to talk to you. Here's who I am. I want to talk to you about this. I love what you do. Here's who I am. What do you think? 20, 25 minutes. And it was that simple.
Doesn't get any easier than that.
Yeah.
Now, how long you been doing your podcast now? You said for about 18 months.
Yeah. January of 2013 is when I kicked it off.
Okay.
January 27th.
I'm real curious about like where your numbers are. Or, I know on one of your podcasts you talk about how many different countries it's been downloaded in and everything, and I'm sure you're checking your stats every minute and a half, aren't you?
Yeah, 100, especially in the beginning. Less so now because I think initially I started, and I had made a big mistake especially when I first launched my podcast, is John Lee Dumas, who I'm sure most of the peoples in the podcast world know who he is. And his podcast was 4 months old when he launched. And I didn't know anything about podcasting. So I reached out to him, Cliff Ravenscraft, Andrew Warner. Those were the three guys that literally that first week, I was like, okay, maybe these guys can give me some advice. And John Lee Dumas was very considered a former veteran or a veteran himself. And he answered a lot of questions, talked to me, just a nice, genuine, straight up guy. My problem was I compared myself to him and his success. And so everything I did was comparison was as an absolute failure initially. That was a hurdle for me to come over. But essentially, just to give you an idea of when I first started, I got a new and noteworthy right out of the gate. And I was getting about 2,000 to 2,500 downloads a day at that time, a new and noteworthy, and it peaked around there at about 3,000.
Yeah, that's great.
Then it dropped off precipitously after new and noteworthy after 8 weeks, and then I've built it back up steadily, and it's just kind of it's stabilized now to around that 2,000 to 2,500 a day, depending on how many that I release. I try to release 3 a week, and so that's where it is. I mean, it's nothing to write home about, but it's a solid podcast. I think those are decent numbers. I don't know. Oh
yeah. Sounds like pretty good numbers to me. Now, how much do you find your numbers vary with the guest, the particular interview, or is it pretty steady across the board?
It's pretty steady unless I get somebody, and every now and then I'll get a guest, and I try to make it easy for them to share it, and it all depends on how well they share it, and you can tell when somebody does. Dana Perino was a perfect example. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's on Fox News. She was George Bush 43's press secretary.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And she was on my show, and she promoted that like crazy on her Twitter, on her Facebook, and my numbers went through the roof because of that and because of her, and that helped tremendously. But for the most part, yeah, you can tell if somebody doesn't share, and if somebody does, the numbers kind of go up.
Yeah,
depending on how well they promote it and how big their audience is.
And do you have any difficulty keeping enough of them in the queue and keeping a steady stream going?
Yeah, that's a challenge. It happened to me. In fact, I'm just getting back into having a steady queue because it got away from me because of my real life work. One of our pilots stopped flying with us, and so we were shorthanded, and so I had to pick up a lot more flights, which really cut into my interview time, and I lost my backlog. I had about a 2 to 3 week backlog, which helped tremendously.
Sure.
And I lost it about 7 months ago, and I was literally having to do an interview and then post it that day just to keep it consistent. And I dropped and I stopped, because one of the key things about a podcast is you got to have consistency with, I think you got to have, your audience has to know when you're releasing it.
Right.
You said you do it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, do it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I got away from that, and I saw my numbers drop because of that. And now I'm getting back to the Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of routine and a backlog, and I'm seeing my numbers go up again.
Okay. And are you still able to, just through your own networking and things like that, is that how you get most of your guests, referrals and that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. I think that for podcasters out there, I think in the beginning it was all me, just, like I said, but it's shifted it's probably 60 to 70% referrals, 40% me kind of just reaching out to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about 70% referrals for guests.
Okay. And do you have a lot of people contacting you on their own saying, I want to be on your show, and inviting themselves on?
It comes in waves. And one thing that's helped too is I got hooked up with a couple PR agencies, that didn't cost me anything. They, I said, hey, put me on your list. And that helps. And then they feed me. A lot of it's junk, like I got one today about the guy who's the pioneer of legalized pot. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't think that would fit in my show, but so there's so you get a lot of junk and but every now and then there's a little diamond in the rough. That,
I don't know. I suppose you could call those guys entrepreneurs, huh?
I suppose, yeah. Or, leadership. I don't know. But anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, it helps. And I do get a lot of, and then I hooked up with, you got to be, I don't know if I recommend that to necessarily somebody, because it's almost like spam. Those guys share the lists, they share with other PR agencies and stuff. And then you start getting all these. I've unsubscribed from probably 8 different PR agencies I didn't subscribe to. Yeah. They somehow got my name.
Yeah. So you get interview spam.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, and fascinating story. We actually have a lot of parallels with both being Marine pilots and getting out and going to the airlines, and then working our way into the entrepreneurial world, and then eventually podcasting. So look forward to talking to you here in the near future, and wish you the best of luck and success with your podcasting and doseofleadership.com. And is Dose of Leadership your main website, or do you have another one that you would like to let people know about?
Yeah, Dose of Leadership is the home for the podcast, and you can certainly find out more about me and my services, my speaking and my coaching. It's certainly there, but there's also richardrierson.com. Which is really specific to my other podcast, which it's just me. It's not an interview. It's a courageous leadership podcast. So there's actually 2 podcasts, and you can find me either way. Richard Rierson, that's Rierson. Anyway, you can find links to connect with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook. You can find out more about my speaking and my coaching. And I also have a product out there. If I can pitch it, we didn't talk about it, so we're talking about podcasting.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
The Podcast Roadmap is a membership site. It's a series of 30 videos, and I show you soup to nuts, everything behind the scenes, nothing hidden, everything for how I started my podcast, how I produced my podcast, how I tracked the guests, and how I stay in touch with the guests. Because the other thing that was really great about podcasting is the powerful network that I've created from it. Even though, I was looking for sponsorships and everything else, the thing that's really been beneficial and has augmented my business, opportunities with other entrepreneurs, partnerships, speaking engagements, coaching engagements, all because of the professional network that was created by podcasting. And I think you could probably attribute this too, even though you're just starting. You can see the benefit and the power of creating a professional network through podcasting, and that's what the course teaches. You can learn more about it going to the podcastroadmap.com.
All right, Richard, thanks again, and look forward to talking to you here in the near future, and we'll call this one a wrap.
All right, Joe. Semper Fi. Thanks.
All right, Semper Fi. I'm out. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.